Right now in South Korea, there is a very strange experiment happening that would be hilarious if it didn't involve the people who are supposed to keep you from getting tackled in a subway station by a crazy person. Imagine just for a second that you're at a beach and you see a lifeguard stand. But when the lifeguard shows up, they're carrying a heavy laptop and a stack of paperwork instead of a flotation device. You ask them if they can swim, and they tell you that while they aren't technically great at the whole staying afloat thing, they are absolute wizards at filing a digital report about why you drowned. That is exactly the kind of energy coming out of the Korean police recruitment offices lately, and it is turning into one of the biggest, most ridiculous dramas in the country. We've reached a point where the people in charge have decided that being a police officer is basically a white-collar office job that just happens to come with a cool belt and a badge. It's a total circus, where everyone is pretending that the law is just a software update you can install on a criminal, rather than something that occasionally requires you to actually grab a human being and make them stop doing bad things. The whole thing started when the powers that be decided to scrap the old system. See, for a long time there was this rule that only about 20% of new recruits could be women. People complained, called it unfair, and demanded that everything be unified. They wanted one big happy test where everyone is treated exactly the same. But here is where the irony hits you like a freight train. Instead of keeping the high physical standards and just letting everyone compete, they decided to take the physical test and basically turn it into a participation trophy. It used to be that if you were an absolute unit, a real physical dinosaur who could do 100 push-ups without breaking a sweat, you got a higher score. You were rewarded for being, physically capable of doing police work. But now, it's just a pass or fail checkmark. If you can do 20 push-ups, you're legally and administratively identical to the guy who can lift a car. The ceiling hasn't just been lowered, it's been ripped out and replaced with a piece of wet cardboard. And the result is exactly what you'd expect. The latest numbers are showing that we might be looking at a future where 70% of new police recruits are women. Not because they suddenly became elite athletes overnight, but because the system itself was surgically altered to make sure they could get through the door without ever having to worry about those pesky things like muscle mass or grip strength. But why would they actually demand this? Why would anyone look at a job that involves chasing criminals and think, yeah, let's make sure physical strength doesn't really matter anymore? If you want to understand what's really going on, you have to look at the cold, hard reality of the Korean job market. This isn't about some noble quest for justice or a deep love for public service. This is about the pension, the steady paycheck, and the prestige of having a government job. In a country where the private sector is a brutal, soul-crushing meat grinder, we're looking at a generation of people who see a police uniform as a ticket to a stable life, but they want the safety of a desk job without the actual danger of the streets. It's a ruthless scramble for a piece of the financial pie where equality is just a fancy word used as a weapon. To get a high-paying government salary, you have these vocal groups who have spent years pushing this narrative that modern policing is all about your brain and your laptop skills. They've basically tricked themselves into believing that since we have high-tech gadgets and AI, we don't need officers who can actually win a wrestling match with a guy who's 2 times their size and half their sanity. It's a face-saving calculation where working smart is just a polite way of saying, I don't want to get my hands dirty or take any physical risks. And you have to ask yourself, how did a whole society get this delusional? Well, that leads us right into the bizarre cultural bubble that South Korea has built for itself over the last few decades. See, Korea is incredibly safe. It's so safe that people have actually developed a kind of collective amnesia about what violence looks like. We live in a world where there are CCTV cameras on every street corner and you can leave your expensive laptop in a cafe for 3 hours and nobody will touch it. Because of this hyper-stabilized environment, everyone started thinking that the law is a magical force field. They think that as long as you're wearing the uniform and you have the authority of the state, people will just naturally listen to you. They've gamified the whole recruitment process, treating the police exam like it's a test for tax accountants or librarians. The societal obsession with fairness in testing has completely crushed any concern for effectiveness in the field. It's all about the score you get on a piece of paper. People are so focused on winning the race to get the job that they've completely forgotten what the job actually is. They think that because CCTV is everywhere, a police officer's physical presence is just a formality, like a piece of living scenery that's there to take notes after the crime is already over. So what happened when they finally got exactly what they asked for? What happens when you build a system that prioritizes the ratio of people in the office over the capability of the people on the street? You get a massive glaring hypocrisy that is starting to backfire in the most predictable way possible. Now that the force is becoming less physically intimidating, the very same people who demanded these changes are starting to panic about their own safety. But instead of admitting they made a mistake, they've come up with a new, even more dangerous solution: just use a taser. They started arguing that because the officers might not be able to physically restrain a suspect, they should just be allowed to pull out a weapon immediately. Think about how crazy that is for a second. To compensate for a lack of basic physical training and strength, people are advocating for using lethal or sublethal force as a first resort. It's the ultimate backfire. In their quest to make the police force more approachable and equal, they're actually making it more likely that a situation will escalate into something deadly because the officer on the scene doesn't have the physical confidence to handle it any other way. It's this weird Swedish syndrome where the state prioritizes the identity of the officer over the actual impact they have on the street. We've seen this happen in other parts of the world where standards were lowered to meet quotas, and the result was always the same. You end up with patrol avoidance where officers are literally afraid to go into certain areas because they know they can't handle a physical confrontation. And yet, the conversation in Korea is still stuck in this echo chamber where any concern about physical strength is mocked as being outdated. People on social media are scoring points in a gender war while the actual foundation of public safety is being quietly hollowed out. They're arguing about who gets the government salary while ignoring the fact that a criminal doesn't care about your exam scores. A guy who is determined to escape is going to use every bit of physical torque he has, and if the person trying to stop him only has pass or fail strength, there is going to be a very messy outcome. We are looking at a future that feels more like a farce than a security plan. There are people out there unironically claiming that physical strength won't matter in 5 or 10 years because we'll have robots and AI doing all the heavy lifting. But what about right now? What about the next decade while we wait for RoboCop to be invented? During that time, the people we are hiring today are going to be the ones showing up when you call for help. We're heading toward a world where you call the police because someone is breaking into your house, and the officers who arrive have to stand outside and wait for backup because nobody on the scene is physically capable of dealing with the intruder. It's going to lead to a total collapse of public trust, and you can already see the cracks forming. The wealthy are already starting to look into private security, hiring elite, physically capable guards to do what the state is no longer willing to do. Meanwhile, the rest of the public is left with a paper police force that is world-class at filing reports and checking boxes, but completely useless when the rare but inevitable moment of raw physical chaos hits the fan. At the end of the day, you can't legislate biology. No matter how hard you try, you can change every law on the books. And you can make the tests as easy as you want, but you cannot change the fact that a violent offender requires a certain amount of physical power to restrain. The current state of recruitment in Korea is like building a glass shield for a hailstorm. It looks beautiful. It's perfectly symmetrical, and it checks every single box for transparency and modern design. It looks great in a brochure. And it makes for a wonderful press release about how much progress we're making. But the very first time a real stone of actual raw violence hits that glass shield, the whole thing is going to shatter into 1 million pieces. We are dressing up a total lack of functional capability in the uniform of authority. And just crossing our fingers, hoping that nobody notices the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, we're being told that the new force is smarter and better, and more evolved, while our own eyes are telling us they are simply smaller, weaker, and less prepared for the reality of the streets. It is a massive gamble with public safety driven by bureaucratic laziness and a desperate need for political correctness. And when the bill finally comes due, it won't be the policymakers who pay the price. It'll be the officers stuck in a situation they can't handle, and the citizens who thought the uniform was a promise of protection. It's a beautiful, symmetrical, perfectly equal disaster waiting to happen. All fuel the truth at Dating in Korea. Support the structure. Stay safe in the lounge.